that's another thing that stupid people like to do, is just unnecessarily cause pain to both other people and themselves. Because this is one of the 5 laws of stupidity that Cipolla mentions, that a stupid person will engage in behaviors that bring no gains to anyone.
Keep watching to learn more.
Book 3 in the new Thinking Aloud dialogue series is UFOs and UAP, Are We Really Alone? Now available on Amazon.
New Thinking Aloud is presented by the California Institute for Human Science, a fully accredited university offering distant learning graduate degrees that focus on mind, body, and spirit. The topics that we cover here. We are particularly excited to announce new degrees emphasizing parapsychology and the paranormal. Visit their website at cihs.edu. You can now download all 8 copies of the New Thinking Aloud magazine for free, or order beautiful printed copies. Go to newthinkingaloud.org.
Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hello and welcome. I'm Jeffrey Mishlove. Our topic today is human stupidity, and my guest, Gabriel Kennedy, is also known as Prop Anon. He is a multimedia artist concentrating on the written word, visual art, and music. His work has appeared in Boing Boing, Mondo 2000, and Bonus Tracks. He first interviewed Robert Anton Wilson in 2003 and was an original member of the Maybe Logic Academy featuring Bob Wilson. Gabriel has released music and created street art as Prop Anon. He has also released music with his band, Hail Eris. His first book is Chapel Perilous, The Life and Thought Crimes of Robert Anton Wilson. Gabriel lives in Southern California, and now I'll switch over to the internet video. Welcome, Gabriel. It's a pleasure to be with you once again.
Hi, Jeffrey. Thank you for having me here. It's great to see you.
You're welcome, and it's great to see you as well. We have an interesting conversation today about human stupidity planned, and I think the first thing we have to alert our viewers, because I presume the New Thinking Aloud audience really are highly intelligent people, that you can be highly intelligent and stupid at the same time. Intelligence is no guarantee that you won't do stupid things.
Oh, yes, indeed. As my dad used to say, stupidity is an equal opportunity employer. Anyone can get the job.
I'm thinking, for example, of the Vietnam War, where in the early days, Kennedy and Johnson worked with, I forget the name now, the head of Ford Motor Company became Secretary of Defense, running the war using all the latest management techniques that had been perfected at Ford Corporation. And of course, it was a disaster for the United States. So lots of times our best and brightest people have led us into disastrous situations at the national level. But I think it's fair to say that this kind of could be arrogance or just plain human folly exists at every level.
Oh, indeed. And it's interesting about this phenomenon of stupidity is how little academic research it's received over the decades of great research done in human psychology. Stupidity has been observed by various sort of cultural critics and, of course, philosophers, playwrights, and satirists over many years and millennia. No one gets a PhD in stupid studies.
You have a wonderful quote in your book from the movie Forrest Gump, in which Forrest Gump points out, he says, stupid is as stupid does. So here you have, at least it's a fictional example, but I think it's probably touching on a human truth that high IQ, it doesn't necessarily lead to more intelligent behavior, and a low IQ doesn't necessarily lead to stupid behavior.
Stupidity, the most basic definition being it's a behavior that lacks good sense or judgment. One could be, a complete genius in one field and show a complete lack of good sense or judgment, especially, I say more and more in the modern definition of the term, in relation to a sort of emotional intelligence. There's a lot of comedy that kind of lampoon very smart people being very emotionally stupid. The fascination with stupidity for humans goes all the way back to Theophrastus, the Greek philosopher. He, in the 3rd century BC, he wrote a tract called The Stupid Man, right? Obviously, it was a fascination for people 2,000 years ago or more. And his definition of it was a mental slowness or a dullness in their speed of responding to things. Idiots are seen now as dullards, right, who can't really respond. But the broader definition of stupidity that I guess we all take for granted is that it's designated by a mentality where one is informed and deliberate. Oftentimes, those are some famous last words shared amongst, among idiots. This seems pretty stupid, doesn't it? And yes, it should be written on their gravestone. But maybe the most important factor here in relating to Wilson is the maladaptive quality of stupidity. That brings up the tension between stupidity and ignorance, because people can behave quite stupidly from being ill-informed and ignorant. But as someone like James Wells, who provides the more modern definition, he would say that ignorance is different than pure stupidity because you don't really know better. I think when it comes to Robert Anton Wilson and his definitions of the term, he provides almost an even broader swath of understanding, because ignorance and being ill-informed is actually so ingrained within the human psyche because of Aristotelian logic and how we're taught very briefly when we say A is B, we know that this is not scientifically the case. Nothing is completely identical to the next, yet we have over a couple thousand years, thanks to Aristotle, according to Wilson, reinforced this level of stupidity in our education system, and it's even embedded within our language structure, that we are already setting the grounds for being misaligned with being able to interpret life on life's terms or reality as it is. We're constantly projecting our maps onto the territory. And in so doing, that's a maladjustment. We're already maladjusted to the songs of nature, if you will. And stupidity continues when we seek to convince other people that our worldview is the right worldview, the correct worldview. Wilson often said that stupidity is basically contagious, right? And it's the cause of more violence and death than we normally give it credit to throughout history. So I think he was onto something there. He's seeking to provide this sort of multi-dimensional definition of this phenomenon that we often refer to with the one simple word as stupid.
One of the points you make in your book is that it's very easy to spot stupid behavior in other people, or even stupid thoughts in other people. And I'm sure comedians do very well pointing that out. On the other hand, it's a lot harder to see it in yourself. And yet each of us is just as vulnerable as the next person.
This is part of the maladaptation, is the inability to recognize when one is behaving stupidly and how easy it is to point out in other people their stupid behaviors. And Wilson provides a tinge of understanding that you could get in the moment, or at least after the fact, because we usually don't notice that we've done something stupid until afterwards. usually when we're in pain in some form or fashion, and it suddenly hits out of nowhere that, oh, that seemed like a good idea at the time. And if we find ourselves saying that, says Wilson, then we know that we've done something stupid.
I can think of at least one occasion in my life when I actually said that to somebody. And of course, he was calling me out like, how could you do this?
And yeah, and this is why I really enjoy reading this sort of little pocket of literature that Wilson dedicates to stupid studies, if you will. It's not what he's most known for, but of course it's always implicit in his work as a satirist. And that is this notion of seeking to really understand what stupidity is, right? Functionally, operationally. And I came across something, I only found it in Wilson, but of course it makes sense. And this is that Wilson finds stupidity a relative evolutionary success. So meaning at some point in time in our evolution, being stupid helped Homo sapiens sapiens further evolve to get us where we are today. So in many ways, we have our stupid ancestors to thank to getting us here where we are right now.
That's a paradox.
Of course, yeah. There's no way of escaping the paradox, especially maybe through the lens of Wilson's work, where he's seeking to constantly confront that paradox, being an agnostic Gnostic that he was. But it can't be understated how dangerous stupidity really is. Even words from Karl Marx, who said that three major powers that compel history. Obviously, we know the economy, that's what Marx dealt with mostly, violence, and the third being stupidity. So that syncopates with Wilson's admonishment of how dangerous stupidity is. How many wars have been started not over a real struggle over resources and the inability to share those resources in a territory, but out of pure stupidity, and stupidity being contagious. Many other great philosophers or social critics have commented on this. Dietrich Bonhoeffer being one that I constantly think about, the German pastor who was executed in Germany for the role that he played in a plot to kill Hitler. He watched his fellow Germans lose their minds in a way. And when he was sitting in the jail cell after being arrested by the Gestapo, he contemplated about how we got here and how Germany got to where it got. And it wasn't from pure evil, and it wasn't even from Hitler being some magical wizard that entranced people into hatred. Stupidity played a major part in German culture getting to where it got at that moment in time, and it being reflected through the demagogue Adolf. And Bonhoeffer was executed at the hands of stupidity. He saw it firsthand, and he said that stupidity is more dangerous than evil. He stressed the sort of sociological element of stupidity more than the individual psychological element. And that's an area of Wilson's work that I think coincides with what Bonhoeffer says, is Wilson observing this socio-semantic area where, humans are constantly basically hypnotizing ourselves and other people. And part of the hypnotism is, this is the way it is. And if you don't love it or leave it, baby. If you don't like it, get out. All that sort of inclusion, exclusion, all of this exacerbates stupidity that can contagiously spread like a virus from one single moron to a whole nation like a wildfire.
Robert Anton Wilson, along with his colleague Timothy Leary, believe that the antidote to stupidity is to increase intelligence, by which I think they meant increase human IQ.
You're referring to, as well, Leary and Wilson's acronym SMILE, intelligence increase, as part of this grand vision that Leary and Wilson had during the 70s for, say, like the future of humanity. Yeah, space migration, intelligence increase, and life extension. And over time, Wilson especially, I think, stressed the intelligence increase part. Neither of them meant this sort of AI, just pure mathematical algorithmic intelligence increase, but like a real increase of intelligence in humanities, right? And emotional intelligence being perhaps one of the more important areas to stress. And what comes with that, one could hope, is a certain sympathy with one's fellow human and non-human alike, all creatures on Earth. Leary's approach was also called infopsychology. So they were, both he and Wilson were very into the notion that we're constantly receiving signals from our environment, and our whole nervous system is centered on filtering out this multitude of signals so we could make sense of and orientate ourselves to survive. And in having to filter out all this information, there are moments which Leary chose from literature from Konrad Lorenz called imprinting. These sort of flashes where an imprint is set in one's psychological framework, where a neural net is formed and information gets filtered through that neural net quicker. And this is a part of forming human personality. According to Wilson and Leary, there were stages or moments in one's development from birth to maybe teenage years where we had moments of imprints, where we had this activation of neural circuits that flashes, it sets, and then it leaves the template for which we receive, as I just said, filters out all the information. But if one receives a bad imprint, quote unquote, say on the first circuit, which has to do what Wilson and Leary called the biosurvival circuit, and it's for the most part one's relationship with one's mother and how secure a baby feels in one's mother's arms. Some mothers don't want their children, and the babies can feel that. And there's this base level maladaptation, this unsyncopation with reality, because, say, staying on this metaphor for a moment, the mother hates the child, but the mother smiles at the child and tries to behave lovingly, but the deeper energy of aversion is felt. So this is the beginning of a neurosis. Freud had a lot to say about this, but Wilson and Leary were seeking to describe it in information theory sort of terms. This imprint at the first circuit would have various behavioral manifestations that may not serve the health of this person growing up. They may then constantly go to people who don't like them but smile in their face, and they can't understand something's not quite right. This is why people go to therapy, to figure this stuff out. But in the meantime, one could be behaving stupidly by hanging out with the wrong set of people constantly, people who are not really there to serve one's own personal good and whatnot. The second circuit is emotional territorial, so one can imprint a position in a status, a situation, what Wilson and Leary call top dog, bottom dog. Some people imprint coming in and being bossy and telling everyone what to do the moment they walk into the room. Some people walk into the room and they look for the authority figure to tell them how to behave. And again, according to Wilson and Leary, this is programmed, if you will, from these imprints. And Leary, of course, believed that entheogens could act to help re-imprint people's maladaptive responses to the world. And in so doing, that increases one's intelligence and one behaves less stupidly, because as the great New York City street photographer Ricky Powell once said, you got to go where the love is. And sometimes it takes a long time for people to truly realize that. Like I've been, or another metaphor is you can't get water from a dry well. People will go searching for love in all the wrong places until they're able to reconfigure this circuitry, if you will.
Well, it seems to me that many people behave in a stupid manner towards themselves. And perhaps it starts there. For example, you'll hear a person say, "I'm stupid." It's as if they're giving themselves a hypnotic suggestion.
And this might coincide, say, within the Eighth Circuit model with the Third Circuit, which deals with what Wilson and Leary calls it's the semantic circuit. The first two areas that are imprinted within us are below, they happen before we were even able to form words to communicate ourselves. So in that third neurosemantic circuit, that semantic circuit, yeah, we constantly reinforce these phrases. Or Albert Ellis, the founder of rational emotive therapy, he had a whole sort of riff about this, about how we are constantly convincing ourselves that we are no good shits. And most self-talk that we have is negative self-talk. A Buddhist perspective would be that's the monkey mind, the crazy that we have inside, that it's any wonder that humans are able to actually communicate about anything. The mind is a terrible thing to taste. One can acknowledge that something was stupid after the fact, and in Wilson's terminology, say, "Oh, be a cosmic schmuck." It's one way to help you stay humble, to realize that, of course, you don't know everything, but to prehensively before the fact put this spell on yourself of doubt and say, "Oh, I'm stupid, I can't do that." I think that's what he and Leary's work to help you do that less.
I'd like to go back to a statement you made earlier that there's some relationship between stupidity and human evolution. And I know you elaborated on that somewhat in your book by pointing out that an unstable society, and instability could be a result of stupidity, actually fosters evolution. That if a society is too rigid, then there's little opportunity for change and growth.
Right. And therein lies another paradox. One could argue that maybe the behaviorists believe that, aided by logical positivism, that they found the cure for stupidity at a certain time. And part of the cure was putting a baby in a box and not touching the baby when the baby's crying. The cure can become another part of the problem. So if we're seeking to eradicate stupidity in society without taking into consideration that babies need to be held from time to time, then yeah, we're just continuing this poisonous pedagogy of evolutionary stupidity. And I think maybe for Wilson, part of his whole rap about all this is that now we have the tools to evolve past the level of stupidity that maybe it did get us to this point, but of course it's time to learn how to, say, in international relations, behave way less stupid and achieve what is really the smartest way to live, which is, as corny as it sounds, like peace on earth, goodwill to man, where everyone has access to clean water, food, shelter. And then all of this, in Wilson and Leary's vision, will help humanity achieve space migration and life extension. Some programs are seeking to achieve space migration and life extension really without trying to increase the intelligence of the everyday person. And that's not going to get us very far.
When it comes to stupidity, it strikes me, and of course I'm a conscientious objector, maybe I'm biased, but war seems to be about the most stupid thing you can imagine. It's a waste of resources, it's a waste of time, it causes enormous destruction, pain, and misery. As General Sherman famously said, war is hell. Why would anybody want to create a hell on earth? But other people argue, well, if it wasn't for war, we wouldn't have had all these great inventions. The computer was developed in warfare. And atomic bombs and nuclear physics, and so that the human intelligence of a culture has greatly expanded because of warfare. People have argued, but maybe we've come to a point in time where that's no longer the case because our weapons are so deadly now.
Yeah, how far has stupidity gotten us? When the machine gun was first invented in the late 19th century, the makers of the machine gun and what the politicians told each other was that this gun is so bad, it's so destructive, that to use it would destroy human life. So we have it, so we are not going to use it. That's the same sort of mental functioning as whenever there's a boom cycle in the economy. And the people are so secure that this boom cycle is just going to keep going. There's nothing going to stop this boom cycle. And then both instances or phenomenon after the fact, many people have said in many different ways, it seemed like a good idea at the time, right? It seemed like it was a good idea to keep investing in this dot-com boom at the time. It seemed like it was a good idea to bring the machine gun to Africa, German soldiers to bring the machine gun to Africa, and then just totally slaughter tons of Zulus. It seemed like a good idea at the time. But sadly, stupidity is multi-dimensional. That's what I'm seeking to get at. In the realm of warfare, a machine gun was seen, or say, for instance, the bombing in Nagasaki and Hiroshima. The logic behind it was it just stopped it. It bombed over. It's done. Even though the war was already technically over, I believe. Or the machine guns. We just killed 1,000 people just off the rip. So there's no more needless damage that needs to be done after that. And this is part of this other stupid thing that humans have said to ourselves and each other over time, is that chasing that there's a greater good beyond the current situation, that one must always think of the greater good, that in the future it's going to be better, but right now we just have to annihilate all these people. We have to send all these people to prison because in the future it'll be good, but right now it's bad. And yeah, I don't really have an answer for that, Jeffrey. What benefits warfare has brought to us, because there are some great inventions that help in everyday life, and what have we lost along the way? In terms of humanity, I mentioned Dietrich Bonhoeffer before, another German who analyzed the rise of Hitler, Erich Vogelin, who wrote in his book, Hitler and the Germans, I believe, wrote a lecture. And he was dumbfounded. How could Germany turn so quick from being such a wonderful culture to turning into what it turned into, a fascist Nazi state? And as I said, it wasn't just Hitler's magical powers of rhetoric over people or Riefenstahl's great propaganda. Hitler was a manifestation of basically this degeneration of a society that was not recovering from an economic collapse, and hatred was growing, as were conspiracy theories. And this contagious nature of stupidity that both Bonhoeffer and I think Wilson would argue played a huge role. Suddenly, it can spark like a wildfire. The violence that can come from stupidity can spark like a wildfire. And for Robert Anton Wilson, that was the ultimate manifestation of the worst part of stupidity, was scapegoating. What Wilson saw was, over history, millions of people being murdered because of sudden and irrational scapegoating. And he considered completely unwise to witch hunt anyone, because all of us can be grouped into said group at any time, especially more and more now. There's more and more identities that we could be all grouped into, and people do it at the drop of a dime. And Wilson recognized that capacity of the human mind, that sometimes first thought is not always the best thought. He was a sort of a Horatian satirist as opposed to a Juvenalian, right? Meaning he sought to poke fun at everyone, but to enlighten, like, the folly of our own stupidity. If you look at yourself throughout the course of the day, there's a number of things that you've done that could have been pretty stupid, right? Luckily, you're not running a country. You're not in charge of a major corporation. In terms of a country, according to Wilson, the framers of the Constitution understood a certain aspect of human stupidity, which is why they established the separation of powers, why there are three functions of government, three branches of government. And yeah, I think there's a lot there. I think that when we realize that scapegoating and that stupidity can be highly contagious, that may help some people disengage from these sort of stupid tornadoes that move through mimetic spaces more than any other places, really. So they move through the internet now more at breakneck speed than in everyday life. And and I think that it really, for Wilson, it constantly comes down to this notion of clear vision is what helps enlightenment. Illumination itself sets a course of there's light that helps you see clearly. It's illuminated. The pathway through the Chapel Perilous is well lit. You could see the dry bones on the ground and where to avoid as you walk towards your goal, if you will. And so part of that clarity, as I said, is clear communication. But clear communication can only take place between equals. And so as long as we have a sort of hierarchical substrate in all of society, there will always be areas of miscommunication and then potential for stupidity to manifest.
Well, when you're dealing in a hierarchical situation, whoever is the top dog is going to have ideas that become dogma within that organization. And if those ideas are incorrect and you have the temerity to call them out, you may be punished.
Yeah, within this framework, punished or fired or sent to jail or tortured or burned at the stake.
Or expelled.
Or expelled, excommunicated, your head chopped off. Yeah, and Wilson, of course, he explores all this within that sort of wonderful discussion of the snafu principle, which he wrote about in his book Prometheus Rising. And snafu is an old military term, and it stands for situation normal, all effed up.
You can say it.
Yeah, right on. Situation normal, all fucked up. And that's very telling. It's like, of course things are messed up. That's the norm, right? And in terms of a system of communication, Wilson observed that in an organizational structure where, of course, there's the top dog and it's a pyramid, right? And so those at the bottom of the pyramid have to constantly police and be aware of their own perceptions to make sure that their perceptions match those of the top dog. And yeah, the more authoritarian a structure or society becomes, the greater the risk of harm for those who don't conform their perceptions to the great leader. And so that Wilson calls that the burden of nescience. So basically one has to dumb oneself down to keep their job or to stay alive, right? And the top dog, in turn, even though the appearance is of having it all together and everything is great for the leader, he or she has to uphold this burden of omniscience, something that is also impossible, that humans cannot do. The top dog has to act like they know everything and has their hands in every pot and knows exactly what's going on in every department and et cetera, et cetera. And herein lies the beginnings of many comedies, movies, plays, and books and whatnot. One movie, an old movie now I could think of, is this movie In the Loop, where it through a bureaucratic governmental structure, some low-level administrator or diplomat mentions the possibility of Britain going to war with some other country, and because he spoke out of turn, this causes some huge international crisis, right? And because he was speaking for the leader, if you will, he spoke out of turn. There are so many other instances where people will get fired, like the phenomenon of the empire wears no clothes, right? So if one points out that the empire is naked and you're not supposed to say that, you're in trouble. And this causes another tension. As I said, like it gets in the way of clear communication, really. And as an organization, the organization itself suffers, because in order to stay truly competitive, one has to be really aware of the territory, reality on reality's terms. But when these structures continue, they become more and more inclusive, like a cult, and the leader or the top of the pyramid themselves are constantly, stupidly filtering out signals that are very important to receive for the survival in the existential moment. And this is why Wilson said most conspiracies usually collapse in on themselves, because they're constantly trying to conform with this stupid view of reality that the leader may hold, and the wheels just fall off, right? The only question is, how long does that take and how much damage is done in the meantime? Because Wilson never really wrote about this essay, but I wonder if he read it, and it's very popular now. It's a 1976 essay by the Italian writer Carlo Cipolla, it's called The 5 Basic Laws of Human Stupidity. And this, of course, is a great sort of distillation of how dangerous stupidity is. And everyone, according to Cipolla, underestimates the number of stupid people, but also the power that stupid people, the damage that stupid people can cause while they're just flailing around at the wheel of the spaceship planet Earth, if you will. And non-stupid people always underestimate the damage that stupid people can cause, which is another interesting paradox, because non-stupid people behave stupidly by underestimating the danger of stupid people. And then we're all caught in the trap. And this is now proven historically. I'm not a scholar on Germany during World War II, but I have some education on it. And one recent article that I looked at, I spoke about how stupid Hitler really was, how idiotic the regime was. Like, somehow we think that these were highly intelligent people who were implementing a very rational approach, which in some ways, yeah, sure. But the rule, the administration, the people behind them, it was a total shit show. And Hitler was completely fascinated with his own ego. He just read the newspapers to see if his name was mentioned. If a writer gave him somewhat complimentary write-up that soothed something in him. This sounds familiar, right? And Chris Hedges, a very good writer who I enjoy, he's also mentioned about the end of the Roman Empire, this rule of idiots that came to power at the end of the Roman era. And for Hedges' take is that it wasn't enough just to get rid of one idiot. The structure was already rotted there, according to Hedges. And this puts the locus of responsibility more on the individual to get smart and stay smart. And I think Wilson offers a little more compassion in his analysis of stupid people, but I don't know if Wilson has the complete answer in terms of dealing with stupid people. I think in his life, Wilson just cut off stupid people.
Well, it may be an unsolvable problem. One of the points that you make in your book, which I found fascinating, goes back to Gregory Bateson's theory of the causes of schizophrenia. When people are given mixed messages like, if you do this, I will punish you, but if you don't do it, I will also punish you.
Yes, yeah. The double bind theory, Wilson mentions that in relation to the snafu principle in his book Prometheus Rising. And Bateson and his team came up with that theory in 1956. And it's, major dilemma in communication where a person or a group receives two or more conflicting messages. But this notion of two conflicting messages and then someone told to make a decision. Today, I guess the terminology is basically like gaslighting, right? People are gaslit, right? In that regard. And what it causes, if not schizophrenia, it definitely causes anxiety. And for children to receive from their caregivers parenting like this also sets a template of, I think, like a generalized anxiety disorder in most people. And I think maybe in most comics, perhaps, that might be a little too presumptive. So in order to escape that dilemma of communication, I think that the first step is in realizing that this person is giving conflicting messages, or this institution is giving conflicting messages. And I think that's one of the areas that psychology has zeroed in on, though, is the sort of Stockholm syndrome, that when one is, say, born and raised in an authoritarian fascist system, they know no other way. So all they know are these conflicting messages. And one can use the double bind as a political weapon, propaganda weapon, to seek to breed stupidity into the population that you want to erode in order to become a fascist dictator.
You gain more control over a population when that population is stressed out.
Yes, indeed. A strategy of tension, if you will.
Well, it does seem to me that when it comes to the double bind, we're all vulnerable and we all exist in a situation of double bind because, for one thing, there are high ideals in every human culture which talk about, the perfection of the individual, the possibility of enlightenment, the search for truth, all of those things. And everybody is taught to be honest and to tell the truth. And at the same time, you have political realities everywhere which are going to necessitate compromises of different kinds. And to compromise at all when we're talking about the quest for truth is a very difficult thing for anyone.
When the frog is in the water at first, it doesn't realize that the water is getting hotter and hotter until it reaches that point when it's too late. They can't hop out of the water and they're cooked, literally. And environmental stress, or mimetic stress, shall we say, from a constant barrage of misinformation or propaganda has been used in fascist takeovers of countries, and it's also been used in warfare, of course. That's the whole role of mis and disinformation. And one of the goals is to throw you off, to keep you off balance and off center. And so how does one remain cool, calm, and collected in a mimetic warfare space, if you will? And for Wilson, he brings it back very simply to education and to constantly educate yourself in the wonders that the human mind has created. Some of the positive things, like dialectic method, logic, the scientific method, the knowledge and function of democracy, psychoanalysis, right? General semantics, study general semantics. And that is the source of, I think, Wilson's analysis of stupidity, because that's what the creator of general semantics, Alfred Korzybski, was getting at, in a sense, was that unsanity, as he called it, results from misapprehending reality on its own terms. It's the nonverbal level of reality, right, of which then we are co-creating in the description of it when we describe it to other people. We should know that how we do that we're constantly mistaking our maps for the world with the territory as it is, right? And finally, Wilson recommended to study one's own consciousness through entheogens, yoga, meditation, biofeedback, neurofeedback. That coincides really with like just the ancient Greek phrase, know thyself. Where can you gain balance in a world of increasing chaos? And that's just learning more and more how to trust your own perceptions while being able to describe this to other people as very simply, I don't think this is the ultimate truth of the situation. However, let me give you my bona fides. I've been standing at this corner for 7 years and I've observed every nook, rock, and cranny. So I could let you know where the water is going to flow when it rains. That's part of when things are in times of dislocation, people don't even know who to listen to, right? And that's the importance, again, in educating yourself and basically critical thinking skills.
One of the points that you make about authoritarian governments, that they engender paranoia in many different ways. For one thing, you point out as soon as you have anything that resembles secret police, you have to have another group of secret police watching over the first group to make sure it doesn't get infiltrated. And as I recall, Stalin set up a situation where everybody in his government was being spied on by someone else.
Yeah. And I think Wilson the satirist just zeroes in on this of really how stupid, right? How stupid, what a stupid waste of time in one reality tunnel such behavior is. But this is the amazing thing about reality tunnels. In Stalin's reality tunnel, in that cutthroat realpolitik world that he embodied, which was a reflection of the way that he behaved, didn't Stalin also murder his top leadership one by one? He didn't just have Trotsky assassinated. He also had those closest to him killed. I think for Wilson, where he would take it is politics as it's practiced today, and increasingly so, engenders a paranoid state of mind. The type of paranoia that he lampooned in Illuminatus trilogy. He often would quote or paraphrase Henry Kissinger, who said something to the effect that, like, if you're not paranoid, you're crazy. That's right. And to preface that, within the Washington reality tunnel, within that world of politics as we see it on TV, if you're not paranoid, you're crazy. And Wilson would often next bring up J. Edgar Hoover, who was very paranoid. And Hoover, according to Richard Nixon's words, had a file on everyone. But if we look at someone like J. Edgar Hoover, the guy just didn't want people to know that he liked being a cross-dresser and maybe was also gay, probably. And so he had this shame to hide. And what's at the root of such like socially neurotic behavior? I think Wilson would mention that people have some really deep unresolved things and therefore have guilty consciences. He said that Washington was full of people with guilty consciences, right? And of course they're going to behave in a paranoid fashion, as are corporate structures. And then he would borrow from the theory of game and economic behavior, I believe, by Morgenstern and von Neumann, which sort of detailed for him. This is where Wilson gets his operational definition of conspiracy. Conspiracies result from these sort of closed systems, closed governmental structure, corporate structure, and more illustratively in a game of poker. So the whole goal in a game of poker is to give out false signals, misinformation about the hand that you have so you can win the pot, but you're trying to pick up real information from the people that you're playing with and extrapolate that into the game of espionage. That's exactly what espionage is in many ways. And also the world of corporate espionage, where there's a lot of that happening. all the time. And this manifests in conspiracy and then stupid behavior as a result, because information is not flowing freely between equals. A game is being played. Who can play with this information and get the goal, right? And for Wilson, the higher you go in the circuits, right, you reach higher and higher states of consciousness, if you will. With each stage comes another understanding, perhaps, of humanity, right? So the ultimate goal, the ultimate win is that everyone is happy, right? You will never be happy, he quoted Herbert Spencer, until everyone is happy. And it's so simple, it almost sounds stupid, right? But how true it is, right? And I think Wilson dedicated a fair amount of his theorizing to, constructing these visions that, if implemented, basically keep the lines of communication clear and open. And in terms of a society, or say, for instance, America, right? The press is the fourth estate, right? The function of a free press is the press is supposed to be the feedback, providing clear signals to the citizenry and the politicians, and how to keep this train moving as well as possible, right? And what's one of the first things that gets attacked when a dictator comes in to power is you attack the press, right? Everything is fake news. And now that's not to say that press establishments are not biased and free from criticism, and of course may also be stupid in different ways. But now we're dealing with different scales of stupidity. I think Wilson was working with the post-World War II level of stupidity that was implemented in American society, and with where we're presently at, all of that, I think personally, can just be wiped off the table, because we have a whole new set of problems that fascism brings to an open society. It seeks to shut the door for any sort of open communication about anything.
I imagine it's not just fascism. It could equally be socialism or communism. Any top-down structure that's heavily authoritarian.
Yes, agreed. And especially, I think Wilson would definitely agree to the way that he, I think, applied the term fascism is filtered a little bit through the work of Wilhelm Reich. So for Reich, especially in his book, The Mass Psychology of Fascism, which I think also came out in 1933, Reich calls both Hitler and Stalin fascist, because Stalin, of course, is the type of communism that he was seeking to implement was extremely authoritarian. And so, yeah, all of this shuts down the free flow of signals that we need to make sound decisions about how to live a good life. And for Wilson, he often called himself a hedonist. He echoes the philosopher Epicurus, who defined hedonism as really enduring pleasure, but it's guided by reason, and pleasure is really more the absence of pain, while seeking to live a fairly simple life. I know Wilson wanted to live it up here and there too, but he did live a fairly simple life, and he doesn't speak much about morality. He tries to speak very scientifically throughout a lot of his work, and in his eyes, morality is just like another function of evolution, if you will. But to call out stupidity, one is being a moralist to a degree, because it's saying that this is not right. It can be done another way. You can be better to your fellow man. So therefore, there is a moral tone there. He wanted to teach people how to basically lessen the pain that they may encounter in this life, because that's another thing that stupid people like to do, is just unnecessarily cause pain to both other people and themselves, because this is one of the 5 laws of stupidity that Cipolla mentions that a stupid person will engage in behaviors that bring no gains to anyone. And so looking at Hitler and his regime, that was ultimately an extremely stupid regime. 6 million people more were killed. People had to confront this notion of Holocaust like never before. And that's why it's so dangerous. And that's why I think Wilson would say we have to get smart quick. And maybe the most important type of intelligence to develop right now is emotional intelligence.
Well, another word for that might be wisdom.
Indeed, indeed. And as Eric Fromm said, I think he said, love is education and wisdom of the heart. And I think that's why Wilson is a romantic. He's focused on the heart chakra in his work, and he's seeking that wisdom of the heart.
Well, Gabriel Kennedy, it's been a pleasure to be with you once again and to keep the memory and the extraordinary genius of my old friend Robert Anton Wilson alive. It is a pleasure to be with you and to share your insights with the New Thinking Aloud audience. Gabriel, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me, Jeffrey.
You're welcome. And for those of you watching or listening, thank you for being with us, because you are the reason that we are here.
Book 3 in the new Thinking Aloud dialogue series is UFOs and UAP, Are We Really Alone? Now available on Amazon.
New Thinking Aloud is presented by the California Institute for Human Science, a fully accredited university offering distant learning graduate degrees that focus on mind, body, and spirit. The topics that we cover here. We are particularly excited to announce new degrees emphasizing parapsychology and the paranormal. Visit their website at cihs.edu. You can now download all 8 copies of the New Thinking Aloud magazine for free, or order beautiful printed copies. Go to newthinkingaloud.org.